chairperson's business.
Apologies, Barry from Barry.
From Barry. Okay. Okay, just to maybe just ask members a quick maybe round of any comments for last Tuesday's debate on our report on wind energy. We also have in your pack, in your table pack, to I think the three newspaper cuttings in relation to the debate. So it's quite good. We've got a newsletter, a telegraph, and the Daily Mirror on it. So, and I think I got a few emails too, and probably members you did too. I got a few emails from people. Seem to be quite happy, content with our report. So minutes, members, at page 6. All content to agree?
Before we move off the wind turbine, can we deal with it now? Chair, as part of the review, we had a presentation from the department, and there was a number of questions asked of the department for respond in writing.
Yes.
I received an email after the debate to see whether or not those answers be furnished to those people. There's specific questions that were asked of the department on the day. Simon Kirk on that departmental. I know that they were responded here to this because we got the answers back to the committee. Is it okay now for those to be made public, or send them out to those people who are requesting them now?
We published them in the report.
No, it was all of them, all the answers.
The responses for the departmental response that the department responded to us and was brought to the committee is in the report.
It's included in the annexes.
All the responses that was given by the department are published in the report. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, no, that's grand. That's content.
And obviously the minister will be writing to us, a formal response to our report. So he said that in the debate.
So that's grand. So you clarified today that all the answers given by the department in relation to
whether people will be satisfied with what was given to us before by the department.
No, appreciate it. Thank you.
But they were all included in the report. Yeah. Okay, minutes. Members, you content to agree the minutes?
No.
Agreed? Agreed. Yep, thank you. Matters arising, remember there's a cover note on page 15. And just one item maybe I want to bring to your attention. That's item 4.2 on page 16. There's a response from the Minister to the DCAO committee regarding defibrillator provision. So I think we certainly just take note, really. It's a good thing, I think, providing these devices in, I think, sport centres and spotting events. Next one is item 5, members, at page 19, synopsis of responses on the consultation on the draft local government transferred functions grant regulations Northern Ireland 2015. We're getting a departmental briefing. So that's page 19 as a departmental paper, and also tabled at what page is that?
7.
Tabled page, pack page 7. Thank you. And you're very welcome, Linda, nice and early. Linda and Jeff, both from Local Government Policy Division. We have quite a few briefings today, maybe 10 minutes from you?
Yes, no, that's fine. Well, we have provided outline briefing on the purpose of these regulations, but just to go through it in fairly simple terms, these are technical regulations to introduce the mechanism to transfer funding from central to local government to cover the cost of those new functions and powers that are transferring to local government on the 1st of April. In the process of considering what mechanism should be used, there was agreement from both central and local government that whatever mechanism was established, it should provide local government with as much financial independence and flexibility as possible. So a traditional grant-based mechanism really wouldn't have worked, because that would have a traditional grant-based mechanism, so departments providing grants on an annual basis to councils to cover the costs, because that would have left local government dependent on bidding each year to the relevant departments. It would be dependent on block grant pressures, and also it would have meant that departments would have remained accountable for the funding, for the money, and that would have added an increased level of bureaucracy, which, when you consider that local government reform is about greater independence and autonomy, it really wasn't in keeping with the purpose of reform. So the mechanism that these regulations now establish will work through the rating system. And in each council area, the rates base will be bolstered by adding an amount to the rating system, which in year one is equivalent to the amounts identified for transfer by each of the departments. And that figure is now being put into the rating system. In subsequent years then, the amount provided will be dependent on the district rate that is struck by each council. So in this way, the delivery of the new functions will be included in the council's general estimates for running costs. And that means that any decisions that councils take about how these new functions and powers should operate, what the cost base should be, will really be factored into the normal run of business when each council determines how much it's going to cost to run their council, and then they set the rate accordingly. So these regulations will be valid for 1 year, because they will have to be revised this time next year to take account of the cost of the DSD functions which have been delayed, and which will be transferring on the 1st of April 2016. So at that point next year, we'll either issue a new set of regulations or revise the amounts in these regulations to take account of what will be an increased sum. That's really all I wanted to say in terms of briefing, but both Jeff, who heads up our Reform Finance team, and myself are happy to take any questions.
Yeah. Linda, as I said before, confessed before, I really don't know very much about local council. I was trying to read this paragraph last night. I could not understand it. Right, it's paragraph 5. So section 27A, blah, blah. Calculation of, provides the method of calculation of the grant. The amount of the grant payable to the council for any financial year is the amount equal to the difference between the amount of the product of the district rate for that year within the meaning of the rates, so far as it relates to the rateable net annual values of the hereditaments.
That's a difficult one.
In the district of that council. I cannot understand it at all.
Yes, I'm not surprised. Rating is a very complex area, and we have had a lot of support from our colleagues in DFP rating policy branch in developing these. Basically, the simple way of explaining this is that at the moment, the rates in a district is dependent on properties in that area, and that's how the rates base is determined. What this does is add an additional amount into that system, which will cover the costs of the functions that are transferring. So the values that you see in the draft regulations is the difference between what it's going to cost the council to deliver all of its functions, including the new ones, and what it is currently collecting from its rates base to cover the costs that it currently has. So it's really putting an additional value onto the rate system to account for the additional cost that the council is going to incur in year one. And then, as I said, that will be set as a value. And then in next year, if council costs go up and the district rate goes up accordingly, then the amount that will transfer and the transferred functions grant will increase. If, however, councils can make savings and the rates come down, there will be a lesser figure transferred. And that, because it's enshrined in legislation, will not be able to be changed. So that will be an inescapable commitment on the Northern Ireland bloc. I don't know if that's helped to explain it, because it is a complex thing, and it's taken a long time, for even officials to find a way of doing this that gives that independence and also the flexibility that councils can determine how much it's going to cost them to deliver these in future.
Okay, so the council then would look at staff costs and services provided
Yeah.
with that new function.
Yes.
So where do they get that information? From the department, I presume?
Yeah, the departments, and there's been a lot of work done through the Transfer Functions Working Group and indeed the Finance Working Group to identify the current costs that are incurred by departments. Because there was a commitment given that the amount transferring will be rates neutral at the point of transfer. Now, if councils make a decision post-transfer on a different way of delivering things that either cost more or less, that's a decision for the councils. But what the executive committed to, and certainly what my minister has done, is transfer the cost to the department. In fact, he's gone slightly further because there was a decision taken by local government that they didn't want to work through the 6 sub-regional structure that is currently in place for planning. They wanted 11 planning offices and 11 planning authorities. Okay. So he has actually bolstered the staffing complement so that each of the 11 new councils is going to get, you know, a staffing structure with a senior planner in place. So those figures have all been collated. There was an independent due diligence exercise commissioned by local government, paid for by DOE, to look into those figures and verify them. And that's where the figures have come from departments. But it has been a decision of each minister as to how much of their budget they're going to surrender to put into this overall sum of money.
Okay, so that's the system. Is it going to be inflationary indexed, or?
No, that's why it's in the rates base, so that, you know, it'll just become part of the consideration of councils in terms of their running costs for future years, and so you know, it'll be in the calculations as to how much of a rate increase or decrease they're going to impose on ratepayers.
Okay, okay. But it may change then?
Yes.
We change every year then?
It will change.
Yes,
Yeah.
it change every year. Okay. Carol?
I just seek clarity on that, Chair. Does that mean then if a function is transferred and they run it more efficiently, basically what you're saying is the level of grant will meet that?
No,
Basically,
not really. In year one, the figure that is put into the rate system is based on the figure that the departments provided, and in fact, which the Assembly agreed through the budget, because I think it's Annex D of the budget that was agreed, has the breakdown of the transferred functions grant. So that's year one. In year two, it will be up to councils to look at the costs of running the new functions and calculate that in amongst the calculations for the district rate setting process, the estimates process. And then the rate will be struck. Now, it will depend on, you know, whether there's extra costs or extra efficiencies across the whole council as to whether the rates go up or down. But whether rates go up, if rates go up, there will be more money provided through this grant mechanism. If rates go down, there'll be less. But it won't be at that point directly related to the cost of running those specific functions because of this issue about financial independence.
Right. Where's the control then in relation to spend?
I think that's coming from the ratepayers, because, you know, councils are always nervous about putting rates up. You know, and this will be, I mean, councils are accountable to their ratepayers and to their citizens.
No, I understand that. It's just the perception of what council is going to be able to do in the future and what they're going to deliver, especially in terms of the extra functions. But that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. So they have to calculate the rate.
Oh no!
They have
It's
to
not
calculate
calculating the rate. It's
the functions as well on top, or kind of balancing it,
Yes.
adding them together, and then block grants and also all the departments funding also that looks at what the rates are. Is that right? Okay. Peter, you want to
Yeah,
come in?
thank you. Yeah, just a few issues. Just wanted to tease out in my mind in relation to this. First of all, in terms of the detail of this, because I think the general direction of travel, I think both from local government, central government, various departments was agreed. Has the detail been agreed across government in the sense of we've got a detailed formula as how it would impact in that sense on this, I suppose what's described as the notional rates,
Yes.
the notional NAV type of thing. In terms of the detail of the scheme, has that been agreed with DFP as well?
Yes.
On that sort of things?
Yes.
I presume just then what we're saying, if I'm getting this correct, the issue in terms of changes year on year is, we'll never say by its nature unhypothecated in its
Yes.
nature. So essentially you have a situation where in Council A, if looking at all the actions of they have to do, they go for a 3% rates increase from a district rate point of
Yes.
view, that will be effectively reflected in 3% of the transfer, or the transfer rate will effectively increase by that amount.
Yes, it will.
Sort of things. I mean, I think it's maybe a difficult way to do it any other way on it. I suppose the only issue just occurs to me, a slight degree of that is, does that mean that you're then going to councils and the ones who are getting the increase are the ones who actually are increasing the rates more? You know, if you've got a situation in which a council was being very hair-shirt and saying, well, actually, we're going to have a 0% rates increase. They have a situation where, and which has happened, I think, in a number of the councils, like Belfast and a few others, I think, have done it this year, for instance. I can see a slight degree of concern where, in one sense, if you take on the other end, some other council side decides, well, we're going to have a 10% rates increase, they get 10% more money out of the thing, and the people who are on a zero are getting to it. There is a slight degree of...
There is that.
And I can see it, but
Where's the incentive to be?
what way... I just wonder as well, in terms of whenever we get to the... And I appreciate we're at the synopsis or response side of it. On the basis of the detail of the wording because there's reference obviously to the DSD transfer,
Yes.
and there seems to be more or less a situation of, right, here's the sort of regulations as per the current situation. When we get to the DSD bit, it'll be a question of either a new regulation or an amended regulation taking place in that regard. I'm just wondering, from that point of view, is there any way of the regulations being phrased initially, which can then effectively absorb then any changes in terms of the rate without there having to be then additional regulations taking place?
No, because we do need to put the figures into the schedule, and those figures at the moment do not include the amounts that DSD will be transferring to each of the councils.
Yeah, I understand that. Is there not... I mean, look, this is maybe something you're going to take back just from a drafting point of view. Is there not anything that can be put in terms of the wording from a legislative point of view, which essentially says, you know, here's the mechanism which we're doing, here is the schedule of the figures. These schedule figures will be adjusted according to, you know, obviously one of your variations in terms of how that is going to be adjusted, presumably, is on the grounds of this district rate change. You're effectively putting a certain variable in that, which will then impact on future years.
Well, actually, yeah, it's a derived NAV value. Is the technical term for it. So there will be a derived NAV value placed on the rating system, which will equate to, you know, if the council was to have a building of that size and that rateable value, that it would generate the amount of income that is required to cover the cost of transfer. So, you know, next year we are going to have to revise, I mean, we did take legal advice on this, and we will have to either revise the figures in the schedule or make new regulation, because we will have to change the figures.
Yeah, but the point, what I'm saying is, I understand you'll have to change the figures. What I'm saying is, look, this may be slightly dancing on the head of a pin in certain regards on this, but you've essentially the amount that a council will get will essentially be a multiplier of, you know, linked in with the NAV on the one hand, or the notional NAV on the one hand, with the level of the district rate on the other hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
In year two, it will be. In year one, you know.
No, I understand that, but I mean, as you go forward, you're essentially talking about a multiplier.
Yes.
In that regard.
Yes.
What I'm saying is there no mechanism without then additional regulations that you can put in that the clause can actually allow for a variation in the NAV without the need for further regulation?
We don't believe so. We can look into it.
Okay.
Um,
I mean, I'm
although
just
we
wondering,
are-
because the other thought occurred to me is that you have a situation where there's the very clear case has been flagged up of the DSD situation, and that's fair enough on it. I'm just wondering that if we reach a stage, and nobody knows what the future holds, where any degree of allowance then for any further transfer at any stage from any department, there's no mechanism to simply, well, you can work out what it will be, but if you're going to then having to adjust the figures, you're each occasion going to have to bring in a new regulation in that regard, as opposed to having a direct formula within that that would reflect the change.
we can look into it, but I mean, I don't believe that we can. Has that?
No, I think we would have looked at either drafting another set of regulations or amending these regulations. That was sort of the option for going forward. That was the options we looked at for 2016.
Okay.
Because I think if you put in any other variable, it may then open up the debate about, whether the funding level was set at the right level to start with. And I think, this mechanism was to take away any doubt that there was a one-off settlement from central to local government.
Yeah.
And then the only changes made after that would be if any additional powers or functions transfer.
I'm just saying whether there may be examination process of some sort of, like, maybe there's the route you go down just of additional regulations each time this happens on it, but I'm just wondering whether there is within that a prescribed formula that can be put, or at least a clause within that, which then provides that automatic degree of adjustment to it when there's additional transfer.
I think maybe because these regulations are being made under primary powers within the primary legislation, and I think we probably will have to, but we can just double check that.
Okay.
But we will have to make these regulations very quickly now, because if we don't, we won't have a mechanism in place to provide the funding that's required for councils. So there is a certain urgency about these now.
Well, maybe just then, slightly on that point then, maybe a bit of devil's advocate. Because presumably this will effectively provide some funding which will kick in pretty much from day one, not a day one of transfer. Could I ask just then why if we're getting just the synopsis responses at this stage, and presumably stuff getting through, this does seem a bit late in the day then, because if we're talking about stuff that will kick in the 1st of April, we haven't actually got the regulations as yet. Now, presumably the regulations are pretty much can be put in very quickly in that regard. But I'm just wondering why it's so late in the process that we're getting to this point on it, because it doesn't seem a great deal of time to either scrutinise or...
Yeah. Well, by their very nature, these regulations are last minute, because we actually couldn't finalise them until each council had set their district rate, because the amount that has to be embedded in the rate system has to be retrofitted against the rates, the district rates that are set. So this is why we always knew that we would have a 6-week window to get these regulations finalised and in place. Now, saying that, the plan is that we provide the grant, which will come through the department on a quarterly basis. So, it's not as if we have to pay this out on the 1st of April, but we don't want to delay too long.
Okay, thanks.
Linda, I just wonder, why does it need to be so complicated? If the department say we're transferring 100 staff, and this is a service we provide, this is our cost in the department, so we are not doing this function, and this is the total cost for carrying out this function, that's now going to be transferred to local councils. So you just give them that money, regardless of what rates they set?
Well, that is what we are doing.
Okay.
And that's what we're doing in year one.
Okay.
Post year one, as I've said, it's really up to councils to make decisions about how they deliver these functions in the future, and whether it costs them more or less. And just simply, the simplest thing in some respects would have been to give them a grant from the department to cover those costs. Yeah. But in the long term, that would have been quite bureaucratic, because, first of all, the department would have been accountable for that money, so it would have had to have come through our accounting system and our governance system. We would have had to have had all the vouching for spend, and it would have also meant that every year councils would be coming to the departments saying, you need to give us X to run for us to deliver our new powers and functions. And considering, for example, that DSD is saying that we are not going to impose, our grants and our systems on you. We are saying to you as local government, you have now a power and a duty to tackle disadvantage in your area, to look at urban regeneration, but you can do that however you want. It would have then got into negotiations each year between local government and different departments about how much should be spent in the area, what their plans are, whether they're too much or too little. And it would have meant that for everybody concerned, central and local government, would have been a lot of bureaucracy attached to that and no independence, which, as I've said, was against the principles of local government reform. So this was the only way that could be found to release money into local government and then let local government determine in future years how much it would cost them to deliver these services.
Okay.
And powers.
Seems so complicated to just...
It is very technical.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Okay. So they don't want to be like Arts Council or whatever, to be in what you call a PBD, whatever.
ND.
The non-departmental body.
No, they certainly are not that. Local government is very clear that they are independent, they are democratically independent, and they are financially independent and answerable to their electorate.
Yeah. Was general sense from the responses seemed to be quite supportive of this system anyway.
Yes.
So, any other questions? No? Thank you very much, Linda and Jeff. Thank you. Okay, members, are you then content for the department to bring forward the SL1?
Yeah.
Content? Right, yeah. Thank you. Then, next item on page 29. That's the road traffic amendment bill, rescinding of decisions on formal clause-by-clause scrutiny. Members, you will recall that we looked at all the clauses, but then the departments then came back to us and said, in view of what we suggested, they are making amendments and bringing them forward. So we haven't produced our final report. So, members, you that have now a number of tabled papers. Sheila, what pages? Page 20. Page 12 and 20 of your tabled papers, members. You need to look at them.
Traffic amendment.
There. The same as yesterday. Yeah. Okay, members. Then I think we have to go through it. Let you have a quick read of maybe page 1, and then we're going to then do the formal consideration on page 2.
We started at 13 and then we're going to 14. The other one's 20. Page 20.
And what's that one? Oh, that's a development. That's a single page.
Yeah.
Okay, members, then if you turn to page 2, then, page 14. Yes, page 2. Page 14, the second page of that pack, of that bit. Members, just to also remind you, I think we are being hand-counted for this session to do with the bill. Okay. Item 5, clause 3 of the bill amends Article 19 of the Order of 1995 to retain the option commonly called the statutory option at the new lower prescribed limits. The committee was previously content with a small technical amendment to clause 3 to comply with the examiner's recommendation on the delegated powers memorandum that the regulation making power should be subject to draft affirmative resolution rather than affirmative resolution as currently drafted. In addition, the committee also asked the committee to bring forward an amendment to remove the statutory option, which was agreed by the Minister. Consequently, the committee formally agreed that it was content with clause 3, subject to these 2 amendments. So the following amendment has now been put forward by the department. Clause 3, page 3, line 36, leave out clause 3. Members, are you content with this amendment? And if so, I would ask you now if you agree the following motion: that the committee agrees to rescind its previous decision that it was content with clause 3 as amended, and that the committee is content with a departmental amendment to leave out clause 3. Members agree? Thank you. Then the next one is miscellaneous amendment, clause 6. The department has brought forward this minor amendment to clause 6. It's a technical drafting refinement made by OLC for consistency elsewhere in the bill. So clause 6, that's clause 6, page 7, line 13, leave out repealed and insert omitted. Members will wish to consider if you're content with this amendment, and if so, you are asked to agree the following motion: that the committee agrees to rescind its previous decision that it was content with clause 6 as drafted, and that the committee is content with clause 6 subject to the proposed departmental amendments. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Next one is paragraph 9, amendment on removal of statutory option from Order of 1995. A consequential amendment of the deletion of clause 3 in the insertion of new clause 6A. The department has provided the following wording for the new clause. After clause 6, insert choice of specimens. 6A, Article 19 of the Order of 1995, choice of specimens of breath, is amended as follows. A, for the title substitute, lower of 2 specimens of breath to be used. B, in paragraph 1, the words subject to paragraph 2 are omitted. C, paragraphs 2, 2A and 3 are omitted. Members will wish to consider if you're content with this amendment, and if so, you are asked to agree the following motion: that the committee is content with the departmental amendment to introduce new clause 6A. Agreed? Thank you. Next one is amendment on minimum age for holding provisional license and mandatory minimum learning period. Clause 16 reduces the minimum age for obtaining a provisional license from 17 to 16 and a half. Members asked the department to bring forward an amendment to remove this clause so that the minimum age remains at the current statutory age of 17. The department has provided the following amendment. Clause 16, page 15, line 4. Leave out clause 16. Members will wish to consider if you're content with this amendment, and if so, you're asked to agree the following motion. Yes, Cal.
Chair, just before you put the question, I mean, it's not saying I'm going to push this to the vote, but I mean, we were content with the 16 and a half, but obviously the majority of the committee is content to change this clause. Just to put on record, please. But I'm not going to force it to any vote, and just want to put that on record.
Okay.
I thought 16 and a half was reasonable.
Okay.
Reasonable.
Thank you.
Back in this.
Thank you. Okay, I shall read the motion to you, members, that the committee agrees to rescind its previous decision that it was not content with clause 16 as drafted, and that the committee is content with the departmental amendment to leave out clause 16. Agreed? Thank you. Next one is clause 17 makes it a requirement for a person to hold a provisional license for at least 1 year before being able to take the practical driving test. The committee asked the department to bring forward an amendment to reduce the minimum required period of learning to 6 months. The department has provided the following amendment. Clause 17, page 15, line 17, leave out 12 and insert 6. Members will wish to consider if you're content with this amendment, and if so, you are asked to agree the following motion: that the committee agrees to rescind its previous decision that it was content with clause 17 as amended, and that the committee is content with clause 17 subject to the proposed departmental amendment. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Miscellaneous amendment. Clause 18, the department is proposing a number of technical amendments to clause 18 due to the Immigration Act 2014 having inserted a new Article 13A into the Road Traffic NI Order 1981 residence requirement, as a new Article 13A is also proposed in this bill. An amendment is necessary to avoid duplication. Clause 18, page 17, line 17, leave out 13, grant of licenses, and insert 13A, residence requirement for grant of licenses. Clause 18, page 17, line 20, leave out 13A and insert 13B. Clause 18, page 17, line 37, leave out 13B and insert 13C. Clause 18, page 19, line 17, leave out 13A and insert 13B. Clause 18, page 19, line 19, leave out 13B and insert 13C. Page 18, page 19, line 27, leave out 13B and insert 13C. The committee has previously indicated it was content for the department to bring forward this amendment. If members are content with the following wording of this amendment, you are asked to agree the following motion: that the committee agrees to rescind its previous decision that it was content with clause 18 as amended, and that the committee is content with clause 18 subject to the proposed departmental amendment. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. More. Next page. Miscellaneous amendments. New clause 22A. The department proposes to insert a new clause after clause 22 on the recommendation of the examiner of statutory rules. It provides that subordinate legislation made under the 1995 order should be subject to draft affirmative procedure rather than affirmative procedure. The new clause also includes at A and B provision that was originally part of clause 3 of the bill. Since clause 3 has now been removed, the draftsman has relocated the provision in clause 22A. The department has provided the following wording for the new clause. Before clause 23, insert further amendment of the order of 1995. 22A, Article 1110 of the Order of 1995 is amended as follows. A, in paragraph 1, exception from requirement for orders to be subject. Oh, someone's got their phone on. I'm sorry, you need to check your phone. Who's guilty?
Mine was on, that's all.
Yes, please. Yes, I can hear it.
There'll be somebody.
Chair, it could be either phone or tablet if it has 3G.
Could be tablet.
If your tablet has 3G, it'll finish. Where's Steve going? He's running right at yours on Wi-Fi.
Don't have one. On me.
No, I haven't got my phone.
My phone, hand up.
That'll leave, wasn't it?
Everybody's innocent.
What about people in the gallery? Have you switched off your phone? Or switch off your phone?
No. Peter Weir.
We're be left out,
Go on, no, can't. No. You can't hear it. That's it.
There we are.
Oh,
Okay.
there's somebody walking past the door.
Right. Disturbance gone?
I'd be
Yes, yes, it was. It was. So I don't know where I am.
Your fault, in.
I'll start again. Yeah, I think it was on, well, further amendment of the Order of 1995. I read that again. 22A, Article 110 of the Order of 1995 is amended as follows. Is that about that?
Get to take it off.
Is that right about that? Yeah. A, in paragraph 1, exception for requirement, from requirement for orders to be subject to negative resolution. For this order, where it first occurs, substitute paragraph 3A. B, after paragraph 3, insert 3A, an order made under A, Article 13A, 4 or 7, or B, Article 63, 9, shall not be made unless a draft has been laid before and approved by a resolution of the Assembly. C, in paragraph 4, procedure for certain regulations or shall be subject to affirmative resolution. Substitute shall not be made unless a draft has been laid before and approved by a resolution of the Assembly. Members will wish to consider if you are content with this amendment, and if so, you are asked to agree the following motion: that the committee is content with the departmental amendment to introduce new clause 22A. Agreed? Thank you. Next item, next paragraph. Clause 23, the department has brought forward a technical amendment to clause 23. Its purpose is to clarify that draft affirmative procedure will apply to any subordinate legislation which amends primary legislation. It is a drafting refinement which is being applied generally in Northern Ireland bills. The department has provided the following wording for the amendment. A, clause 23, page 22, line 11, leave out a statutory provision and insert Northern Ireland legislation or an Act of Parliament. Members will wish to consider if you're content with this amendment, and if so, you're asked to agree the following motion: that the committee agrees to rescind its previous decision that it was content with clause 23 as drafted, and that the committee is content with clause 23 subject to the proposed departmental amendment. This is a bit of a nuisance, isn't it?
Don't record that.
I have to
Don't record
amend
that.
all of that. Right, Schedules 1 and 2, members. Schedule 1, a number of consequential amendments have arisen as a result of the previous amendments. The department is proposing the following amendments to Schedule 1 in relation to the removal of the statutory option. Schedule 1, page 29, line 7. Leave out section 2 and 3 and insert section 2. Schedule 1, page 29, line 17. At end, insert choice of specimens. 2A, the amendment of the Order of 1995 made by section 6A do not apply in relation to an offence committed before the commencement of the amendments. The department is also proposing the following amendments to the same schedule in relation to the minimum age for holding a provisional licence and the mandatory minimum learning period. Schedule 1, page 31, line 30. Leave out paragraph 12. Schedule 1, page 31, line 35. leave out 12 and insert 6. Schedule 1, page 31, line 40, leave out 12 and insert 6. Schedule 1, page 32, line 28, leave out 12 and insert 6. The third and final amendment to Schedule 1 relates to the definitions of taxis and taxi driver's license. It was a transitional measure which was only required, quote, until the commencement of sections 22 and 23 of the Taxis Act, Northern Ireland, 2008, and a quote. Those provisions have now commenced, and paragraph 2 is therefore no longer required. Schedule 1, page 29, line 10, leave out paragraph 2. Members will wish to consider if they are content with these amendments, and if so, they are asked to agree the following motion: that the committee agrees to rescind its previous decision that it was content with Schedule 1 as amended, and that the committee is content with Schedule 1 subject to the proposed departmental amendments. Agreed?
Yep.
Agreed. Thank you. Next paragraph, Schedule 2, the department is proposing the following consequential amendments in relation to the removal of the statutory options. Schedule 2, page 33, line 31. In column 2, leave out in Article 19, paragraph 2, and insert in Article 19(1) the words subject to paragraph 2. Schedule 2, page 33, line 31, in column 2, at end, insert Article 19, 2, 2A and 3. Members will wish to consider if you're content with this amendment, and if so, you're asked to agree the following motion: that the committee agrees to rescind the previous decision that it was content with Schedule 2 as amended, and that the committee is content with Schedule 2 subject to the proposed departmental amendments. Agreed? Thank you. Next step then, the second stage of the bill is due to end on the 27th of March 2015, so members will wish to finalise the committee's report and order it to be printed as soon as possible. We have a date, is that right? On the 19th we have the date.
It's on the chair's brief.
Yep, I think we have that. What did we say? Oh yes, members, that we have, members, the draft report will be put before you on the 19th of March. So that was really only very little, just to add those bits and those amendments in. Just next week we're going to be in Bangor, so it will be the following week that the Secretariat will bring back the final report, the draft final report for members to
What are we doing in
approve.
Bangor then?
Sorry? We're going to be in Bangor next week for the MCZ's workshop.
I can't wait for that. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. That's a reminder. Yes.
Want to get out of Belfast.
Want to see a good turnout.
You will. You get a good a lot of people about Bangor. They'll be-
Wanted to go to Belfast, so I went to Bangor.
Lovely place.
Meeting.
Marine, in
go to the
the
west.
Marine Cot Hotel.
Go to the meeting.
Yeah, yeah. You can go out and look over, and you know you can see the Belfast Lock.
Oh, that will.
Yeah.
I said we're going to.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's go to Dungannon and look at the sites
So
there.
we have
Oh, yes,
that's
that's-
all done now. Yep.
Thinking about.
Okay, members, we are slightly behind schedule, so we move on. Item 7, members, page 37, Environmental Better Regulation Bill departmental briefing. Members, the department has offered to provide a pre-introduction briefing on the Environmental Better Regulation Bill. It's hoped to bring this to the Assembly before Easter recess. And there's a departmental briefing paper on page 37.
Right, let's go.
Okay. So, I wish to welcome Dave Foster, Director of the Regulatory and Natural Resources Policy Division, Sandy Truesdale, Assistant Director, and Robert Gray, the lead, the BU lead in the department division, policy division. We have about half an hour for this session.
Okay.
Maybe if you can brief us for about 10 minutes.
Yep.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you. Please
Okay.
proceed.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting us this morning to provide this informal briefing on the Environmental Better Regulation Bill. I'm Dave Foster, the Director of the Regulatory and Natural Resources Policy Division, and this is Robert Gray, the Bill Lead, and Sandy Truesdale,
Sorry,
the
just
Assistant Director.
remind everyone this is being hand-sorted.
Okay, thank you. So with your permission, I was proposing to ask Robert to provide an outline briefing of the draft bill, and then of course we'd be very happy to take any questions that you may have, recognising of course that you'll have much further questions once the bill was introduced formally to the Assembly and goes through the various stages. Before I just hand over to Robert, I was just going to make one or two introductory remarks to set the context for the bill. On his appointment, the Minister made it very clear that he was adopting a key theme for his time in office of a better environment and a stronger economy. And we can no longer afford to consider either the environment or the economy in isolation. It's vital, therefore, that we grasp the many opportunities that arise from thinking about the environment and the economy in tandem. In particular, the Minister believes the Department needs to think and work differently to support innovation and prosperity. So with this in mind, we need an environmental regulatory system which goes beyond fit for purpose and actively supports and recognises responsible business and their need for swift, well-informed decisions. So regulatory reform is high in its priorities for the Minister. Also, the work of DOE's regulatory reform initiative is recognised at the executive level, and not least within the Northern Ireland Economic Strategy. And in particular, the Strategy's Action Plan commits DOE to develop proposals for primary legislation to improve environmental regulation and reduce the regulatory burden on businesses. A good and modern regulatory system in the 21st century should ensure two key things. That if you comply with the environmental and heritage laws, you should have less burdensome regulation. And if you regularly fail to comply with the environment laws, then you should get more attention from the regulator, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, NIEA. So the draft Environmental Better Regulation Bill is designed to support this outcome by providing the capacity for DOE, for the Department, to introduce a new streamlined environmental permitting regime, and by providing the opportunity to provide more uniform inspection powers in particular. It will also provide for a more streamlined regulatory systems in relation to air quality and drinking water. So just before I hand across to Robert, I'd just like to really highlight that also that the bill isn't the only thing that the Department is doing in relation to improving environmental regulation. There are things we're doing outside of the legislation. So this bill is part of a wider departmental regulatory transformation programme, which is aimed at reducing the burden of regulation on businesses. And that in itself evolved from back in 2008 when the NIEA published its first Better Regulation programme. So, for example, members might be aware that over the past 12 months, NIEA has been developing prosperity agreements with businesses to support innovation in resource efficiency and environmental performance. And the first of those was signed by the Minister and the Managing Director of Energy and Linden Foods. The aim of these new prosperity agreements is to help to reinvent NIEA's relationship with the business community. NIEA is also undertaking a number of initiatives in the area of customer relations, including the appointment of contact points within NIEA for its key customers and partners, with the aim of ensuring that there's a more strategic and joined-up relationship between the agency and its main business and NGO customers. As part of the regulatory transformation programme within the department, the agency has adopted a new operating principle, and that really is that NIEA and the department will make it easy for good performers and difficult for poor performers. So the aim of the draft Environmental Better Regulation Bill is to provide the policy and legislation framework to enable NIEA to make good on that operating principle. And so perhaps now I'll hand across to Robert to explain in more detail around the draft bill itself.
Okay. Well, the bill is one important element of the Department's regulatory transformation programme. And I just wanted to go through the outline paper that's been provided. I wanted to work through that. Regarding the background to this bill, we're trying to deal with the situation. Businesses find environmental regulations complex, inflexible, incoherent, and time-consuming, and it's become increasingly burdensome for businesses to understand environmental law, and more importantly, equally importantly, for regulators to implement it. And following consultation, policy development work and engagement with stakeholders, environmental permitting and powers of entry and investigation are key areas of environmental law which have been identified as a priority for legislative reform. And if I could just elaborate just a little bit here on how we've got to the point where we're at. You know, the main elements of this bill have their origins in a report by the Northern Ireland Law Commission, which scoped out environmental law and identified environmental permitting and powers of entry as areas that would benefit from legislative reform. We then had, in the previous Assembly mandate, there was an environmental better regulation white paper consultation document issued, which received widespread support from stakeholders, and that was followed up with a consultation on policy proposals for this bill. And the committee may recall that in September 2013 it was content to note the synopsis of the responses to that public consultation on the key policy proposals in relation to environmental permitting, powers of entry and associated powers, and was content for the department to proceed in making the policy. So regarding the purpose and the policy intention of this bill, its main purpose is to provide enabling powers to allow subsequent regulations to be made by the department for protecting and improving the environment. So essentially then, in respect of those elements of the bill, it's what we would call a skeleton bill, and the meat is put on the bones of that skeleton in the subordinate legislation programme that will follow the bill. The regulations to be made under the bill will introduce an environmental permitting system and rationalise powers of entry. And the bill also makes amendments to the Clean Air Northern Ireland Order 1981 to provide for a new streamlined method for listing authorised fuels and exempted fireplaces for use in a smoke control area. It also contains amendments to the Environment Northern Ireland Order to remove the requirement to make further assessments of air quality in relation to air quality management areas. And it amends the Water and Sewerage Services Northern Ireland Order 2006 to transfer responsibility for the regulation of drinking water quality for public supplies from the Department for Regional Development to the Department of the Environment. The policy intention behind this bill aligns with the Executive's programme for government priority of growing a sustainable economy and investing in the future by having a simpler, harmonised and easier to understand regulatory framework. And the bill also supports the Executive's initiative Building a Prosperous and United Community, which refers to the need to reduce regulatory burdens and red tape for businesses. I think you mentioned at the beginning that we aim to introduce this bill to the Assembly by the end of March 2015. That's still our target. So I've referred to the term environmental permitting. So what do we actually mean by environmental permitting? I'm just going to briefly summarise what we mean. It's a wide range of activities involving the management of waste or causing emissions that have the potential to pollute the air, water or land must have a permit or licence issued by the Department or in some respects a District Council in order to carry on these operations. Currently there are separate regimes with different sets of regulatory controls governing waste, pollution prevention and controlled water and radioactive substances. Regulations to be made under this bill will enable the Department to bring forward an environmental permitting system whereby the existing separate regimes are integrated into a single regulatory framework with common procedures leading to greater consistency. And the other key element of the bill concerning powers of entry. Environmental powers of entry and their associated powers fulfil many different purposes and functions, ranging from routine compliance inspection to investigative powers. The powers allow an authorised person to carry out inspections on land and property, take samples and search and seize items during investigation. And what we're trying to do with this bill is to reduce the complexity of environmental legislation in respect of permitting and powers of entry and associated powers in order to lessen regulatory burdens on businesses. As I said, the bill is a key element of the Department's regulatory transformation programme. And the overall aim of the programme is to provide a more streamlined and effective regulatory system for business and regulators, so that businesses who deliberately breach environmental laws will find regulation to be direct, robust and expensive. They would be the worst performers. And businesses who occasionally breach environmental laws through lack of understanding will find regulation to be supportive and effective in getting them into compliance. These would be regarded as the middle performers. And businesses that regularly comply with environmental laws will find regulation to be quick and easy, the best performers. And then businesses that want to go beyond compliance to unlock economic opportunities through business innovation will be supported and encouraged. They are the visionaries. So a very brief outline then of parts 1 to 5 of the bill. Part 1 of the bill is about environmental permitting. The current system of regulatory control in respect of environmental permitting contains elements of duplication. It's confusing for industry, regulators and others, and it may actually act as a barrier to entry for new businesses. It's necessary to rationalise the permitting regime, to simplify and reduce the administrative costs of environmental regulation while continuing to achieve intended outcomes. So the regulations to be made under Part 1 of the bill will provide an environmental permitting regime to replace the current system with a simpler, risk-based approach to permitting supported by common administrative procedures. Regulated activities may require a bespoke permit, a standard permit, a registration, or be subject to general environmental rules, depending on the complexity of the activity and the environmental risks which it poses. The regulations will provide a common set of environmental permitting procedures to replace several regimes under existing arrangements and will allow for a single permit to cover multiple activities on a site where appropriate. This will simplify compliance assessment arrangements and will in some cases reduce the number of inspections required. The scope of the new permitting regime will be subject to consultation as the regulations are developed. The regulations to be made under the bill in relation to permitting will not change the substantive requirements of permits, but it will reduce the administration necessary to deliver those requirements. The benefits for business will therefore generally be expressed in terms of savings in administrative costs. This approach has the additional benefit of reducing the risk of long-term serious non-compliance going undetected, and has strong similarities with good practice in other countries, such as the Netherlands, Australia, England and Wales. Turning to Part 2 of the bill, regarding powers of entry and associated powers. All elements of environmental law, there are provisions contained in them concerning powers of entry, and these are quite significant powers. They're a valuable tool for environmental regulators in terms of their enforcement, inspection and monitoring activities. They allow environmental regulators to enter premises and conduct actions such as inspection, search, collecting and retaining evidence. Businesses may have their activities regulated by different areas of environmental law with differing powers of entry and investigation. And this plethora of powers of entry across the body of environmental law makes it difficult for individual businesses to understand the law, perhaps also for regulators to implement the law. So Part 2 of the bill requires a review of powers of entry and associated powers to be completed by the Department. The review will provide an opportunity for a thorough and full analysis of all environmental powers of entry and associated powers. And the review will question whether the existing powers are fully justified and proportionate. It will give a full picture of how environmental regulators can exercise the powers and in what circumstances. The review will help to determine the extent of the subordinate legislation necessary to rationalise the powers of entry and associated powers. So to conclude then, the measures in Parts 1 and 2 of the bill will make it easier for regulated businesses to understand its compliance requirements and for the Department to assess and enforce compliance. It will help to deliver a more efficient, outcome-focused regime that will both protect the environment and contribute to the development of a prosperous economy. The subsequent regulations will also provide a robust legislative platform for the implementation of new future EU environmental directives. As I mentioned earlier, Parts 3 and 4 and 5 of the bill contain miscellaneous amendments to Clean Air Act, Clean Air Order, Environment Order and Water and Sewerage Services Northern Ireland Order. So we're happy to take any questions, and I look forward to detailed engagement with the committee during the bills committee stage. I was with the committee before and with the previous bills, and look forward to the detailed clause by clause scrutiny on this bill. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And we all have heard about, you know, the consultation, the white paper, and the consultation and all that, or green paper, or words, was it? So it's certainly, I think a lot of people will welcome that, and I do have some reservations, and I look forward to looking at the bill. I'm all for helping businesses and, you know, streamlining the regulatory regimes. And I think, as you said, you know, the different inspections, different rules, just make it so confusing, I think, for businesses. And sometimes they don't intend to break the law, but because of the confusing different types of laws and regulation, then I think they breach the law without intending to do so. So I think certainly welcome simplifying it and streamlining it. And I suppose this is also in line with the REFIT initiative in the EU about maybe simplifying some of the directive requirements as well. So I suppose that is kind of travelling, you know, in the same direction as the EU. But my really concern is how are we compromising NIDA's compliance role, enforcement role? I think a balance has to be there. So, I mean, another question I want to ask is, so you're saying the second part is the review. So the primary legislation is just to ask for a review of the power of entry, but all the regulations are going to be in the secondary legislation and the regulations.
Yes.
Why are we doing that? What's the benefit of doing that?
Well, the powers of entry and the safeguards associated with those powers, they're very important, and there are human rights implications and so on in relation to all of this. And the bill provides a very robust platform for a really thorough examination of that, and a report will come from that, and that report will be laid before the Assembly, and the Environment Committee will have a full opportunity to consider that.
Is it unusual in primary legislation to say we're going to have a review about this and we're going to look at the findings from the review and then we're going to make secondary legislation? Do you not usually, do some research or consultation and then set up in primary legislation to say what you're going to do?
Well, yes, there is a precedent for this in
Okay.
it's called the Protection of Freedoms Act.
Okay.
An act in force in GB, and it parts of that act looked at this whole area of powers of entry and associated powers. And the model used in that act, we have used that model as a basis for taking forward this element of the legislation, and that included a review, in a published review that could be consulted upon before the regulations were actually brought forward, because there's important issues about safeguards and so on in relation to powers of entry. So it was really to be upfront with all of that. But I agree with you, it is a slightly unusual approach, but we are following that model.
Yes. So really part 2 is really just to call for a review of the power of entry. You're not actually going to set any really law in saying what it is going to be.
The review has to be carried out first. Yes.
Yeah.
But we would expect, given the work that has already been done, we would expect certainly, at the very least, some attempt to bring together various fragmented powers of entry and to simplify those.
Okay.
But it's this issue about safeguards and human rights implications and that sort of thing. So we want a robust platform to deliver that.
If I could maybe just pick up on your first point, Chair, around would it be a risk of compromising the NIEA's role or powers?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the key thing there is that the new permitting regime will be a simplification of the administrative procedures, but it won't in any way affect the technical judgment either of the agency or compromise standards that come primarily from European legislation. So if, for instance, if a regulated site currently has one or more licenses, and that license might within it require certain air limits to be met, for instance, in emissions to air, then this will not affect those air limits. It might mean that those limits are more simplified in the licence with conditions relating to waste or water discharges, but the fundamental, if you like, requirements in terms of what has to be done to mitigate any risk to the environment won't be directly impacted by this legislation. That's fair to say.
And it's not giving out the message to businesses that there is really going to be a lowering of standard required of them.
No, I think in our conversation with business, they recognised that the requirements are there in terms of their standards of performance, and in general terms, the good performers and the best performers, the vast majority of businesses have got no issue with that.
No.
I think what they fed back to ourselves and to the agency and probably to members is that is the bureaucracy around it, and the paperwork and the confusion that's causing the most difficulties.
Yes.
If we can do something to remove that so that they're able to focus on what's the requirements within the licence, and that the conversation with the regulator is about that and not about what does this paper mean, so that actually the discussion is on the key issues about what should an appropriate level of performance be within a permit, then that will be of help to both the regulator and the regulated.
Yeah, I'm smiling, thinking of the terms you give them, the visionaries and the good performers. And okay, well, other members, lot more. Lot more?
No, I think.
Oh.
I don't know where you got that from.
Oh. Okay.
I'm listening intently.
Okay, no problem. Carl?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. And I'm sure you're really looking forward to go through it, piece by piece. No, but just one clarification, obviously, and parts. In particular, part 3 of the bill, in terms of the authorised fuel and exempt fireplaces. I mean, clearly in working with businesses, I mean, there's always this issue of adapting to change and on how they adapt and how much it costs, the cost issue in relation to that. Could you expand a wee bit in terms of the responses you got in terms of those particular issues, especially in exempt fireplaces, and comment a wee bit what we mean by this and how, what impact it's going to have on
well, in terms of the exempt fireplaces and fuels, this is a simplification. It's making it easier and better for businesses. Today, if an operator develops a new smokeless fuel, but more importantly and more likely develops a new fireplace that can be exempt in a smokeless zone, what we have to do now is we make legislation every 6 months to catch the new approved fireplaces.
We've seen plenty of them coming through the committee.
Yes, yes. So basically what we're doing now, there will be a centrally held list. The fireplaces will still be tested and approved, but instead of coming back to the committee every 6 months to just add to the list, that list will be deemed as the authorised fireplaces. So basically, if I'm a manufacturer and I manufacture or design and build a new fireplace in December, I don't have to wait to June to get it onto the authorised list. He'll have to wait a month. And it's the same with fuels. It's basically a streamlining of the process. There's no point. If these things are tested, they get onto the list automatically. So instead of making the statute, they will be held on a, they will be on a centrally held list. The testing will be the same. The checks that will have to be done will still be the same. It'll be on a list rather than statute brought through the Assembly.
Yeah.
May I just add that the testing is done on a UK-wide basis, and currently the different jurisdictions will make their own regulations. Therefore, we're moving away from that in England and Wales, and so this enables us to be equally quick when the technical assessment's been done that these are appropriate fuels or fireplaces. So rather than waiting for regulations to be made and to be signed by myself or another colleague, we're willing to do it administratively. So it should speed things up for those manufacturers, but still the technical assessment and rigor will be there.
Okay.
That will certainly help businesses and, as you say, innovation as well. Okay, Carol?
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Okay. No other questions? And when are you going to bring this to Assembly? Introduce it? We've only, what, 3 weeks to go?
Well, we're hoping it will be cleared by the executive today.
Okay.
Depends whether it's on the agenda, but we're ready to go, providing it's cleared by the executive. If it is cleared by the executive today, we would be looking to first reading on the 16th of March. If not,
Monday,
because of
Monday.
yeah, 16th of March.
Okay.
But if because of the recess and the Easter recess, that
Be in April,
it
then
could
we'll
be
come
April,
back
yeah.
for the second stage. Okay. Okay. Very good. Well, we've heard about this for a long time, about time now. We want to see it in front of us. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you.
Okay, members, that's the end of this session. The next session, item 8, members, and we're getting another departmental briefing, and this is looking at the phase 2 planning reform and transfer of functions to local government, and you have a briefing paper there at page 105. Page 105. The department had requested this opportunity to brief the committee on the second phase of regulations, which will complete the transfer of planning functions to local government. The department has provided the relevant SL1s, and it's for information only. These will be considered on an individual basis, obviously, in due course as they come along. Members, also, there's a table paper on page 23. And that's from the department, is that right? Yes. Page 23 in your pack.
SL numbers.
Okay, oh, they're all on SL1s. Okay, I'm sure Angus will go through that with us. Angus, more to come.
We're near the end now.
Yeah.
Getting there.
So I want to welcome Angus Kerr, Joe Tawney, Irene Kennedy and John Conlon. You're all very welcome. So we're not too bad for time. About 10 minutes. Please proceed with your briefing.
Thank you very much, Chair. We're delighted to be here today to brief you on the outcome of the Department's recent consultation on planning reform subordinate legislation Phase 2 and to hear any views you may have. You are aware that responsibility for the majority of planning powers will transfer to the 11 councils on the 1st of April next month. The Planning Act 2011, which has been subject to full Assembly scrutiny, introduces the new two-tier planning system, with responsibility for the majority of planning decisions transferring to the councils. Councils will be responsible for preparing their own local development plans, determining the vast majority of planning applications and enforcement activity. The Department is bringing forward a broad range of subordinate legislation under the Act within a relatively short time period, and to manage this effectively, as the Committee is aware, the Department has consulted on the legislative proposals in 2 phases, in order to better manage the workload and also show connectedness of the many reforms. All 18 SRs have now been made, and as part of the Phase 1 Planning Reform Subordinate Legislative Programme. So we're making good progress. On October the 31st, 2014, the Department launched the Phase 2 public consultation, which dealt with those issues which, while important in delivering the broad range of planning reforms, are not essential to the continued operation of the planning system when powers transfer on the 1st of April, as opposed to Phase 1, which are. The Department, nevertheless, is aiming to have these Phase 2 reforms introduced as early as possible in April 2015. The Phase 2 proposals primarily relate to simplified planning zones, the levels of the new fixed penalties and modification and discharge of planning agreements. The Department received, in terms of the Phase 2 consultation, we received 26 responses to the consultation paper. The representations came from councils, business groups and environmental groups. The range of responses indicated broad support for the reform of the planning system, with most respondents welcoming the proposals. A detailed synopsis of responses received and the Department's consideration and proposed response to them has already been sent to committee members. Details of the level of responses are set out in the annex to the synopsis. Although there was broad support, the Department proposes to make some minor amendments to the proposals, which are also set out in the annex. I will now take members through the 3 key areas highlighted, highlighting issues raised through the consultation together with the Department's proposed responses. I will start with simplified planning zone regulations, which are subject to negative resolution procedure. The consultation paper sought views on this subordinate legislation, which includes provisions for a council making and adopting SPZs. An SPZ can be an area of land earmarked for specific development where planning permission for the specific development is given without the need for a planning application or payment of a fee. In general, the response to the consultation was very positive, with 96% of respondents giving their broad support for the proposed regulations. There were a number of issues raised by various respondents in relation to future guidance, conditions, the Council and Department's roles, and how SPZs would work in practice. The Department recognises that in addition to the legislation, guidance is key to the operation of SPZs and will ensure that detailed guidance will set out the procedures contained in the legislation and address the Council's preparation, adoption and alteration of SPZ schemes. Guidance will also cover the issue, the use, content, conditions and effect of SPZs. A number of respondents also raised issues about the impact of SPZs may have on sustainable development principles, longer-lasting benefits for the economy and environmental priorities, as well as highlighting that SPZs shouldn't be used as a mechanism to undermine regional or local development planning policies. Respondents also made it clear that the Department has an important strategic responsibility for land use planning across Northern Ireland, together with ensuring a consistent approach and an appropriate application of SPZs across council areas. When preparing the SPZ, a council must take account of the regional development strategy, any policy or advice contained in guidance issued by the Department and such other matters as the Department may prescribe or, in a particular case, direct. The Department, through its Oversight Intervention Rule, will ensure that SPZs by councils take account of policy requirements with regard to sustainable development, the Strategic Planning Policy Statement and adopted local development plans. SPZs will not remove the requirement for either councils or developers to abide by other regulatory systems. The detail of the schemes will be subject to public consultation and will also involve consultation with the Department. I would point out that the Department has sought legal advice on certain issues, for example regarding title and clarification of the area affected by SPZs, and proposes to make minor amendments to the 2015 regulations. The changes include an additional regulation to clearly highlight the requirement for a title to be provided for the SPZ and minor drafting changes to Form 1 of the schedule, which have been further refined. In addition, it is proposed to remove Regulation 21 dealing with restrictions on planning permission. A council must not include in a scheme any development which is within a description mentioned in Schedule 1 or 2 of the EIA regulations, where the development is likely to have significant effects on the environment by virtue of such factors as its nature, size or location, unless, that is, the council has made a determination that the development is not EIA development. These Regulation 21 provisions are covered by the recently made EIA regulations. Finally, a statement setting out that the 1990 regulations are revoked will be included. I will now move on to the fixed penalty regulations, which covers the amount of fixed penalties for failing to comply with an enforcement notice and for failing to comply with a breach of condition notice. The consultation proposed a fixed penalty amount of £2,000 for failing to comply with an enforcement notice and £300 for failing to comply with a breach of condition notice. Overall, there was general support, 85%, for the introduction of a fixed penalty notice as a discretionary enforcement tool and for the proposed regulations which set out the penalty levels. Members may recall fixed penalty notices were introduced by the 2011 Act as a means for dealing with certain environmental crimes. A fixed penalty notice does not carry a criminal conviction, and the recipient can opt for the matter to be dealt with in court instead of paying. A fixed penalty notice will allow a person who fails to comply with an enforcement notice or breach of condition notice the opportunity to discharge any liability for the offence of non-compliance without having to go to court. Some respondents to the consultation suggested an element of caution in the use of a fixed penalty notice and that it may not be appropriate for all breaches. The fixed penalty notice is an additional enforcement measure and as an alternative to potentially lengthy and costly court cases. The intention, therefore, would be to issue the fixed penalty notice, giving the offender the opportunity to pay a penalty as an alternative to prosecution. The Department recognises that the penalty amount may be viewed as low for more significant breaches. However, in such circumstances, prosecution through the courts would be the more appropriate course of action. This will be a matter for a council in assessing the nature and scale of particular breach of planning control and selecting the appropriate enforcement measure. A small number of respondents proposed a sliding scale of amounts based on the size, scale and type of development as well as the nature of the offence. However, no specific approach or clear proposals were provided in the response as to the level of penalties or how such a system would be operated by the Council. The Department considers that there would be legal and operational difficulties for a sliding scale process in what is meant to be a simplified approach. I now move on to the Planning, Modification and Discharge of Planning Agreements regulations, which covers the modification and discharge of planning agreements. Under the regulations, councils as well as the Department will be empowered to enter into planning agreements where they operate as the relevant authority on planning matters. A planning agreement is a voluntary, legally binding agreement which can be utilised to overcome identified barriers to the granting of planning permission, normally for large-scale major planning applications which cannot be suitably addressed by way of conditions attached to the permission. The consultation proposal dealt with a changed appeal period against the determination of applications to modify or discharge a planning agreement, going from 6 to 4 months. The purpose of the change is to align the appeal period with other appeal provisions under the 2011 Act. 96% of responses to this question agreed with the proposal, with only one response suggesting it should remain at 6 months. 4 respondents made no comments or response on this particular aspect of the consultation, a number of responses highlighted the need for appropriate resources and the necessary skill base to manage and deal effectively with the modification and discharge of planning agreements. A few responses drew attention to the requirement for guidance. In light of the strong support, the Department considers the response to this aspect of the consultation to be very positive, and the proposed reduction from 6 to 4 months for the review period to be an appropriate and consistent measure. The Department has decided to proceed as proposed in the consultation paper. Other than this, the Department considers that the proposed regulations deal mainly with technical changes to accommodate the move to the two-tier system and new council responsibilities. In relation to next steps, the Department proposes to have all SL1s for Phase 2 legislation proposals to the Committee for consideration as soon as possible, and in fact I think they're already with the Committee. 3 SL1s will cover simplified planning zones and modification. Sorry, these SL1s will cover simplified planning zones and modification and discharge of planning agreements, and they will also cover the SL1 for the statutory rule and fixed penalty amounts, which is subject to affirmative resolution. The Department will also be bringing forward a series of technical statutory rules which amend existing statutory rules to reflect the new two-tier system, but do not make any substantive policy changes. And these are the Certificates of Alternative Development Value Regulations 2015, the Planning Conservation Areas Consultation Regulations 2015, and the Planning Inquiry Procedure Rules 2015. We are happy to take any questions members may have. Thank you.
I had to take that all in. You gallop it through. Right, and I was fiddling, trying to find the page you were on. I missed most of what you said about the simplify planning zones. So they are all going to be done to local councils when they are looking at their local development plan. Right, this is the power going to give to them. So how simplified? Quicker in terms or lower of requirements?
Well, I mean, we would anticipate that councils would consider the need for simplified planning zones when they're bringing forward their development plans. That makes sense. They're looking at the comprehensive development of the whole area, and they may want to identify areas where they consider, that approach would be most effective to regenerate.
Like a business park, or
business park, exactly that type of thing. But there's no requirement that they do it through the local development plan. I mean, a council could, decide just very quickly to introduce a simplified planning zone, maybe before they get their development plan out. But you're absolutely right. The sensible approach probably would be to prepare your plan strategy at least. The plan strategy would probably identify those areas where a business park or something like that would be most effective, and then they would move forward with their SPZ. But the real benefit of them is there's a schedule with a simplified planning zone which indicates a number of uses which the schedule, the simplified planning zone scheme, if you like, it sort of means that don't require a planning application and don't require planning permission. So basically the developers can, if they're complying with those requirements of the SPZ, they just go ahead, notify the council, no need for a planning application, no need for all that process, no need for the fee and so on. They can just develop, and therefore it brings forward development more quickly, would be the argument. Of course, the council will have had to take into account all of the implications of a development like that when they're preparing a simplified planning zone in the first place.
All.
Pardon?
Free for all?
No, I mean,
not quite.
Not really, because in a sense it's a bit like assessing the planning application in advance through the preparation of the simplified planning zone, if you know what I mean. So the council, when they're preparing simplified planning zone, has to anticipate what the implications would be if the identified developments came forward. So as part of that scheme, they would be doing all the consultation that you would do if you received a planning application, if you like, even though there was, if there was no SPZ.
Okay.
So it's not a free-for-all. It's basically the council almost doing the work up front and then identifying what would be acceptable, and then allowing the development industry to very quickly come forward with all of those things.
So they would put the requirements, the conditions, the material conditions or up front.
Exactly.
And then people can apply. The massing, the height, and
precisely.
all that.
Yeah, absolutely. That would all sort of stuff would all be included in the simplified planning zone. And as long as the developer complies with all of that, then they can just go ahead very quickly.
It's scary though for planners to say that they can just go ahead. Would it?
Not necessarily, because the planners are involved in the scheme, you know, to
Yes.
make sure that the scheme is right, so that that it's conditioned correctly, that the uses are acceptable, that there aren't any difficulties and problems with going forward with the uses. I mean, you know, they would chiefly be used in areas where, like a business park,
Yeah.
where really, you know, they're not the most sensitive areas. There's not residential development around them, and so on. You know, those would be the sorts of sort of locations for simplified planning zones generally. Although we've never had a simplified planning zone in Northern Ireland.
No. Have they got that in England and Scotland? They do, haven't they? Yeah, they're
Yes, they
ahead of
do.
us.
They have simplified planning zones in England. Not that many.
Okay.
Current one in Slough is a sort of a good
Is
example.
that mostly for business? I mean, would that be, say, a recycling plant in such and such an area can go ahead?
I think it would be really very difficult to handle something like a recycling plant through an SPZ, because there are sort of exclusions and checks and balances in the system where if something required environmental impact assessment, then it would be unlikely, you know, it can't be covered in an SPZ.
No.
So for that sort of development, you know, it's not really designed for that sort of development.
Okay. And you said there still be consultation, you know, but yeah, notification of neighbours and all that.
Absolutely. It's more like a mini development plan style
Okay.
consultation. So that, you know, it will be put out for public consultation, and all of the consultees, you know, roads, water, environment, and so on, would all be consulted fully as part of the process.
Okay, thank you. Carol?
Thanks, Chair, and Angus, Chair, you're welcome back.
Thank you.
I'm sorely tempted to say you've finally seen the light. We've looked at this before. I think this is welcome, to be honest. But I also I agree with you in terms of clearly looking at this in tandem with the area plans probably would be a more appropriate way to do things, to be honest with you. Hopefully it'll give that wee bit of flexibility if there is occasion out there to do that, but it's certainly welcome. We've had this debate before. I think I finally won this argument, but that's only my personal opinion. But see, in terms of, and I think, I suppose, if you look at it from the point of view where people had genuine concerns in the process, we've built all of those things in the new Planning Act in terms of up front and going out to objectors and, you know, the consultation process. You know, we've had the pods already and all of that process, but under the new planning law we'll have neighbour notification, better engagement, responsibility on the applicant. So them processes are already there, built in already, so I do welcome that. I don't see a major shift. I do see that there will be an opportunity in terms of, you know, the simplified planning zones coming in, if there may in the future be an opportunity. But I think over the next 2 or 3 years they'll be looking at their own area plans anyway to develop, and council will have responsibility. But I certainly welcome today's proposals. I think, Chair, there's an opportunity there in the transition period maybe. But like I say, it's down to local authority now to see where we go forward.
And once
But
it's
we've had this debate
yeah,
before, Chair.
Yeah. Once it's designated as a simplified planning zone, if there's a major development like John Lewis, would it then be would that application then be dealt with the strategic planning division in the department, or still remain within local council's decision?
Well, a major retail development like that would initially be handled by the council, unless the minister wanted to call it in because he considered it to be of regional significance.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, just a wee follow-up, Chair. I mean, yes, we're talking about enterprise zones here, in terms of SPZ type.
Yeah.
Right, that's what we're talking about. Business parks and the likes of possibly that benefit, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a good, I think it's quite reasonable approach.
The community hub and that sort of thing.
The only
Community
sort of-
hub.
Yeah, just to clarify that the difference between SPZ and enterprise zones are usually enterprise zones with financial.
No,
exactly.
it's the principle.
They only go to Coleraine.
Oh, grant it's the principle of the idea of it.
That bit's outside of planning, but yeah.
But we haven't used much of that type of enterprise, zone type of planning
City deals.
schemes, isn't it?
No.
Very common.
Or city deals, which is a similar initiative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Treasury, which we've done none of, but
Yeah.
we've one enterprise zone proposed for Coleraine, bizarrely, for Derry, but that's another debate. We'll have another.
Yeah.
Try to get into the early economic zones and the debate, but it didn't go anywhere. It's grand.
I know.
We'll get there in the end.
You're very optimistic. Lord Morrow, it's you now, I think.
Yes, it is.
Is that right? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Angus. A couple of issues. First of all, if I picked you up right, you talked there about enforcement would happen a bit quicker, or that has the potential to do that. Now, life has taught me that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I'm just wondering, are we going down the same road here again? And in relation to the actual planning strategy for a district council area, I remember working on the old East Tyrone area plan. Irene, you might remember it. I'm not trying to get your age or anything, but you might remember it. And which it was 15 years out of date. I think the Dungannon area plan at the moment is at least 10, 12, 14 years out of date. Are we going back into the same cycle again of working on old plans? And are the resources there to do all of this? I suspect, Angus, they're not, but I mean, you're going to convince me they are. Would let you do that.
I'm going to try. I mean, I suppose the couple of things there. I mean, the Planning Act has introduced a fundamentally different development plan process, which was actually aimed at trying to address the chronic failures that we've had in the previous plan process, which you've identified and which there are plenty of examples of, and it's really to try and focus on seeing development plans as really kind of live documents which are constantly reviewed, constantly monitored and then reviewed, as opposed to this process we've had in the past where we, you put a whole lot of energy into a plan. It takes about 10 years to get it forward and then we forget about it for another 10 or 20 years or whatever. So it's fundamentally moving to that sort of more, monitoring and review approach, and also the introduction of a two-stage approach where we have a plan strategy comes through very, very quickly. I mean, the draft plan strategy can be out in a matter of months rather than years. That then quickly goes through independent examination, hopefully, becomes settled and adopted, and that then narrows the scope for debate and negotiation and so on around the second phase of the plan, which is the local policies plan, where the sites are all brought forward and identified, and then tying all of that, both of those processes, into this concept of soundness will also help to move away from that very adversarial approach that we took to plans in the past. The fundamental problem with the plans in the past, and we did the research into this, was the independent examination of the public inquiry process. That's where they became delayed. Broadly, the preparation of the plans and getting into public consultation, we weren't, I'm not saying that we were the best or very fast at it, but we weren't that bad at that. The problems came whenever you opened up in the public consultation. You got hundreds and hundreds of people writing in, I don't want this site, I want that site. You got a whole process around the inquiry and so on, which was very slow and delayed. So we've tried to address all those and move away from those in this new process, and move away from those problems. And then the second point that you rightly raised is around resource. And what we have done is, because no matter how good the new system is, if we don't have the people there and the resource there to deliver it, it'll still not make any difference. So in each of the 11 planning teams that have transferred to the council, there is a team dedicated to development plan with one principal officer in charge of the plan. And that's quite a senior level within the planning team that's gone across. So I'm hopeful that councils certainly have every opportunity to have the resources there and to take this new, better and faster process forward and actually deliver plans much more quickly.
And Chair, could I ask, in relation to the flexibility within the new plan, we have, for instance, you get an area plan or a district plan, or whatever it might be now, the new definition would be, and you get phase 1 and phase 2 in it, where you get perhaps then the planners will come back and say, oh, well, phase 1's not used up, there's another 40 acres or 200 acres in phase 1 still not used, yet phase 2 would be more appropriate in some. Is there going to be flexibility within all of this to move around on that? Now, I'm not talking about abuse, because I'm opposed to that, but a degree of flexibility here that allows sensible forward planning and our towns and villages and cities to develop in a more comprehensive way.
Absolutely, that is a key, and that is an incredibly important point, and that's something that's another failing of the previous system in a sense, because that hasn't really worked very effectively. And there's two things that we're doing to address that. One is a new approach to call for sites, where we're actually, instead of actually zoning a whole lot of sites, say for example in phase 1, which actually aren't realistic. You know, in reality, no one's going to bring them forward. There may be in ownership of someone who doesn't want to sell them and develop them or something like that. A much more realistic approach is being taken to that sort of phase 1 to identify what is actually available. And then secondly, you know, we will also be doing what you're saying, which is the annual monitor and at the minimum 5-year review, where you actually look and say, you know, we've actually ended up, you know, not doing as well as we thought we would, so we need to bring more land in, or even we've done better than we thought we would, so we don't need to bring the additional land in yet, and so on. And if it transpires that sites for a number of years aren't used, then they can be taken out. And they can, well, you know, that's just not coming forward anymore. We'll bring forward a site from phase 2. So that flexibility that you're talking about is there.
Could I just ask, Angus, just on this about taking out, because I remember then there was a whole legal wrangle started. Is it, can you legally, for instance, once the land is zoned for development, and I think the planners, if I can remember rightly, felt that they might have run into some legal problem of actually dezoning that land and rezoning other land. Is there potential to run into that sort of a scenario again?
Well, you would need to have very good reasons for doing that. In other words, you need to be able to demonstrate that there's a significant difficulty within the area and a difficulty with that particular site. The legal problems that the plan process suffered with actually, whilst I think probably that was maybe at the heart of some of the concerns, and in fact actually the challenges were around the strategic environmental assessment to plans. That was the whole legal challenge, if you like, to our plans. Although I think you're quite right that in some cases it may be that at the heart of that was a concern about dezoning. But you know, dezoning is possible. It's possible to do. It has been done. It's part of even our old plan process.
And Chair, final question, and just on the dezoning, if an individual wanted land dezoned, never mind the planning authority, because I think there's two people or bodies at play here. Is that potentially possible?
That's possible through the if you like, the independent examination process. People can write in and say that that particular site is not the sensible site to be developed for this particular plan for the following reasons. In other words, they're really saying it's not sound for the plan to go forward on the basis of that particular area for development, and actually this would be a better way forward, and then that can be fully considered and addressed.
What about substitution then?
Well, that might be that would probably be what objectors, a lot of objectors and representations would be making those points. They may well be saying, you know, the development for this particular town's gone in the wrong direction. We think it should go over here. That's not sustainable. It's not sensible. Those sites aren't going to be available. We're bringing more information to the table here and saying, in fact, we believe that the town should develop as follows and suggest other sites. Sorry. But it must all be couched around the soundness issue.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask Angus again? What did you say in relation to enforcement? Well, I know what you said, but I'm not sure what you said whenever I asked the question. I know what you've said in it's going to be quicker. I think you did say that, didn't you? I look forward to that. enforcement actually going to be quicker?
It's being recorded by Hansard tomorrow.
Well, I mean, the councils are free to take an approach to enforcement that they think is appropriate, and the fixed penalty notices that we're talking about today is another tool in their armoury that they can use to actually work very quickly, because the fixed penalty notices work fast. They're not like the
they work fast when they're applied, but I mean, it's getting from the stage of saying, well, there's the fixed penalty notice, but sometimes getting it to that stage, I think it's just quite torture.
Yeah.
We're talking about years sometimes.
Well, hopefully not for fixed
Right,
penalty
hopefully,
notices, but yeah, I mean, enforcement is difficult.
Yes, I
it can be
appreciate that
time
too, but
consuming.
I think, and it is important sometimes too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. No more questions?
Just before we do leave that, because
Yes.
whilst I welcome the SPZs, I don't want the message coming out here today that they're going to take over from the area plans and everything else, because there's a good body of work already done there. And I appreciate the question by Lord Morrow, because he's teased out a lot of good things in terms of zoning and de-zoning and everything else. But there is a body of work there. There's opportunity for everybody to become involved in the process. So, I don't want any message coming back from this debate today that SPZs are going to take over from the area plans. That's not the intention of it.
Not at all.
It's just creating an opportunity in terms of what Lord Morrow said about phase 1 and phase 2, if there's an issue. But primarily the area plans or the district plans are going to be the main thoroughfare and the main driver for land use.
Well, absolutely.
The SPCS are generally quite small. They're not big areas, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, well, no more question. Well, I'm sure we'll see you again with the SL1s coming along. All the best. Thank you. Are you going to see the students this afternoon? I've been invited to see some planning students, like we did last time.
Not that I was aware of, no.
Oh, well, that's me then. No, we were at the thing together with Angus and me. Okay, members. So that finishes that session. Happy enough, members? We'll wait for the SL1s coming along, and I'm sure, if you need him to come back, we can ask them to come back again. Okay, the next lot are all on SL1s and SRs, and I'll go through quickly. Members, next one is an SL1 on page 154. The local government transition incidental. Oh, we have a briefing on this one too. Sorry, we have a briefing on this one. I can't go through it quickly. The local government transition incidental, consequential and supplemental provisions, regulations NI 2015. We're having Linda again. We could have organised it. You didn't have to go back.
Oh, don't worry.
Go out and come back again. Right. Members, this will address the continuation of the status of city charters for new councils. The department wants to lay this rule as soon as possible, but it will be in breach of the 21-day anyway rule, isn't it? Yeah. In order to provide councils with details of these regulations in advance of the 1st of April. Welcome Linda, Andy, Pearson and Julie Broadway. So about 10 minutes, Linda?
That's great. I'm going to actually pass over to Julie. She's going to do the initial briefing.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to brief you about another set of regulations with a snappy title, which for shorthand we're calling the Charters Regulations. If I could just give you some background to the proposed regulations. All 11 of the new councils have initially been set up as district councils under the provisions of the 1972 Local Government Act as amended by the Local Government Boundaries Act 2008. Under Section 2 of the 1972 Act, a council can become a borough council by petitioning the Secretary of State for the grant of a borough charter, which designates the district of the council as a borough. And Section 124 of the 2014 Local Government Act provides the Department with an enabling power to make incidental, consequential, transitional or supplemental provision as is necessary in connection with either the Local Government Act itself or the Local Government Boundaries Act. So those are really the interplay of the pieces of legislation this legislation is being made under. The primary purpose of the regulations is to enable the new councils to obtain or to preserve borough status, and it also makes associated provision in relation to aldermen and the roles of honorary freemen. The making of the regulations, together with the provisions of the 1972 Act and the 2014 Act, will essentially give councils a choice of whether they wish to remain a district council, whether they want to petition for a new borough charter, or whether they want to preserve one of the existing charters within their district. Regulation 3 enables a new council to become a borough by preserving, by the 1st of October 2016, an existing borough charter where the whole or major part of that borough is within the new local government district. And this preserved charter will therefore have effect in the whole of the new local government district. In some circumstances, city status was conferred on a local government district or borough, and in order to ensure the preservation of city status linked to borough charters, Regulation 3 also provides for the preservation of those borough charters that are linked to city status without those three councils having to do anything else. These regulations will have no effect on two of the cities because in the case of Armagh and Newry, city status was granted to the towns of Armagh and Newry, not the boroughs. But in the other three cases, the three cities are linked to borough charters. In the case of the two older cities, this is done by preserving the county borough charters, which is essentially a repetition of what was done in 1972, because the 1972 Act preserved the county borough charters. And then, additionally, in the case of Lisburn, the regulations continue the Charter of Lisburn in respect of the new Lisburn and Castlereagh district. Regulation 3 will annul any borough charters which have not been preserved, either automatically by these regulations or by resolution of the new council by the 1st of October 2016. So essentially, councils have until the 1st of October 2016 to decide whether they want to preserve one of the existing charters within their district and to make a resolution to do so. Then associated issues with that, Regulation 4 provides for the designation of aldermen, and again, this really replicates legislation that is already in place, which is the Local Government Modification of Borough Charters Order, Northern Ireland 1973. And these regulations will revoke those 1973 regulations as they're no longer needed. Regulation 5 provides the rules in relation to freedom of the borough, and again, this replicates provisions that were in those former 1973 regulations. In relation to existing freemen's roles, where before the 1st of October 2016 a new council becomes a borough, whether by preserving an existing charter or seeking a new charter, any existing freemen's roles within the whole of the new district will form part of the freemen's roles of the new district. And so essentially that's what the legislation does. We consulted on the draft regulations and we sent you a synopsis of responses which was considered at your meeting of the 12th of February. We received comments from 7 of the new district councils, 1 of the existing district councils and 2 other organisations. And of these 10 respondents, 1 expressed no view on the regulations and the other 9 were broadly supportive of the regulations. But there were 2 main issues raised which caused us to make amendments to the regulations. The Department had originally proposed a date of the 1st of April 2016 as the date for councils to preserve existing charters or petition for new charters and for the associated issues around freemen's roles to form part of the new district. But in response to the consultation, some of the councils raised the issue of if they were part way down the process of applying for a new charter but that process hadn't been completed by the 1st of April 2016. It might cause them some difficulty, so therefore we've changed the dates. We've extended that by another 6 months. So those dates have now been changed to the 1st of October 2016, and we've spoken to the NIO, and that will give sufficient time should any council want to, petition for a new charter, for that to be done before that. The other issues around the aldermen, we had originally proposed at the first AGM of the new councils, which are all being held at the minute, that provision should be made, for election of aldermen. But again, 2 respondents noted that the timing of the meeting might be problematic for them, because if they hadn't decided by that stage whether they intended to continue a charter or not, or to apply for a new charter, that could have an effect on the date of the election of aldermen. And also, given that we've extended the date to the 1st of October 2016 now, it also could have led to the situation that a council would be unable to hold a first election of aldermen until the next election, local government election. So therefore we've changed the legislation so that the department councils can now either have the election of aldermen at their next AGM or the one following at a meeting following when they receive borough status, or the borough charter. Then if I can turn to the 21-day rule. And we've highlighted in the SL1 form that, subject to the committee's views, we would propose that these regulations will come into operation as soon as possible, as in next week, and that this will be in contravention of the 21-day rule. The reason for this is that actually councils have asked us to bring these in as soon as possible. I mean, we could actually make the regulations and have them in time for the provisions that are needed by the 1st of April. That's the provisions to continue the city's charters that are linked to borough status. We could have those in place and not breach the 21-day rule, but it would mean then the councils would only have 3 days if they want to, resolve to continue one of the charters in the existing district. So they have asked us if we can possibly bring these in as soon as possible, and that's the reason why we're breaking the 21-day rule, or we're proposing to, because they're all about to hold their first AGM.
Yeah, back to the whole process.
And we will be writing to the Examiner of Statutory Rules to explain this. So we're happy to take any questions on.
Okay, well, you made it a lot clearer for me, Julie. Good you're here. So would the majority of super councils be asking for borough status?
No, some of them are choosing to stay as district councils. I mean, there's actually, quite a mix. Some I think that most of those that want to continue borough status want to do so by continuing one of the charters within the district, because it's a simpler process and they can actually do that just by a simple passing of a resolution in the council. It can be done quite quickly, whereas it could take about a year if they wanted to apply and petition for a new charter.
Okay. So within the new group of the super councils of the different current district councils, if one of them's got borough borough status, then the new council can continue. They can either choose to continue that charter by resolution, or they can apply for a new charter. And then Lisburn's going to be city council, Armagh, Newry City, and then Belfast, obviously.
Armagh and Newry actually these regulations don't affect their status at all, because it's actually the towns of Armagh and Newry were granted city status, whereas the other 3 cities, it's linked to the borough charters, and in the 2 older cities, the county borough charters. So this will this will preserve those charters, those relevant charters that are linked to city status.
Okay. So we still are going to have 4 city councils?
Well, it's actually no. There's 3 city councils because it has to be the borough
Okay.
that is the city for the council to call itself a city council. So in the
Okay.
case of Armagh and Uri, they're not city councils because it's not linked to the borough.
Right. I'm with you. Okay. Right. Clear as mud. Yes, no, I'm with you, Julie. I'm with you. I understand.
Craigavon and
Yes.
Newmore and Down will have cities in their areas, but that does
Okay.
not make them city councils.
Right.
Yes, completely.
Yes. Understand. Yeah. Yeah.
Freedom of the borough chair, as long as you get the march cheap down the main thoroughfare, the ground. Freedom is the most,
That's maintained.
freedom is most
Thank you.
important.
Yes. Only our sheep run free. I suppose not put it. Yes, I mean what I suppose is likely to happen is that traditionally, or at least for quite a number of years, we've had maybe around about a little bit of majority of probably council people around a very large minority, maybe about 45% roughly of big districts are thereabouts. Can't remember the exact figures on it. I suppose it's likely to be, broadly speaking, reflecting that in terms of the new councils. Just suppose a couple of questions just on the detail of this. On the issue on the alderman, just following Craig, first of all, is that a requirement then that it has to be a borough? You can't have aldermen if you don't. It's purely of a borough.
Yes.
What is an alderman?
Oh, sorry?
What is an alderman? I've been asked this question for about 10 years. Nobody can ever answer.
I think it's largely
I was in
speaking.
council for 6
Sorry?
years.
Very important council.
Still don't know what it means.
Okay, I suppose to get the answer, I mean, it probably doesn't have any particular significance other than as a title and probably sometimes a certain level of in functions, potential seniority and that type of thing. I think a lot of councils that do operate it tend to. Sometimes the thing if councils wear robes, sometimes it can be different, of a different nature and that type of thing.
Would they get more pay?
No,
No,
no.
no, right.
There's
Okay.
there's no money.
No
on
money
that,
involved.
That side of things. However, that doesn't stop necessarily the keenness sometimes for people to take those particular positions in that regard. I presume also similarly, obviously by definition, as it confers, although it's simply a title, there's no particular additional benefit in that regard, so therefore it's outside the scope of any of the positions' responsibility requirements.
They're not.
And what way, just with Alderman, in terms of the, I appreciate you've given the sort of the indications of, depending on timescale, it could either be directly post the borough status, or alternatively perhaps at the start if that was resolved on it. What's the position then in terms of, because I think probably the one council maybe has applied to a couple of occasions at Belfast where they've gone through a couple of different phases where I think for a while they went to the decision they didn't appoint aldermen. They did, and then they didn't, and then they did again, type of thing on it. Is it simply a question then of the council resolving to appoint aldermen, or what's the...
I think it. Andy, do you?
Yeah, it's pretty much an optional thing. If the charter allows them to appoint aldermen, you can. These regulations say that where they're appointing aldermen, this is how you appoint them.
It's the opportunity for people to opt in or opt out at any stage in that regard.
That's right. Yes.
Finally, just in terms of you mentioned about, and I suppose it's one of the bits, I appreciate this lies with the NIO, but clearly you've had some level of discussion with the NIO. Purely as regards then the granting of a borough status, and through whichever route it's, a couple of different routes you've indicated, and I appreciate that's not under the DOH control, it's NIO, etc. I suppose maybe councils that are applying will want to have a bit of an indication. What indications you got from the NIO in terms of timescales that are likely from an application? That what are we? You mentioned about one of the reasons why I think they would put back was on the basis that
yes, we just
whether things would get cleared or not. I mean, how lengthy a process? Those who are applying for borough status, is it their idea, or what's feedback?
We engaged with NIO a while back, and they advised that it'd probably a process taken between 6 to 12 months, but 12 months at the outside if everything was right, all the paperwork etc. was all sorted out somewhere. 6 and 12 months.
Might be wrong. I mean, I don't know what entirely is involved, and you wouldn't have thought in one sense it should have an enormous amount of paperwork, and you just wonder why it takes that length of time. But
Bear in mind, that's only if they're applying for a brand new borough status. If they wish to continue with one of the borough statuses that they've already got within their old council, then it's a simple matter of transferring that over.
So that would be just a similar administrative process. It would take maybe a couple of weeks or maybe some of that nature. It's automatic.
It's actually automatic. It's just the resolve.
I think it may well be some of the councils may simply take that as a route in that.
I think actually the majority of them who are seeking borough status, that's the route they're planning to take.
And in terms of, again, obviously, the automatic transfer, then I think if there's a new application, is there any estimate of a cost process for a new Or is there from the administrator?
There's, as far as I understand, there's no cost implication. I think there might be a cost involved in producing a formal
the actual
charter
document.
at the end of that, but
Even then, you're talking about
coat
relative
of arms or
minimums.
anything like that, but yeah, cost, no application.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah,
Chair.
I know some of the councils are looking for new names, so they really can't complete or finish, naming their councils or the super councils until they get that status. Because they don't know now whether they're borough or...
And that's another reason why they're
Yes.
asking us to make sure these regulations are in place as soon as possible, so that they can make the resolution about borough status. And then the next process is, if they want to change their name,
Yes.
they write to the department, because there's actually two things. That it depends on what type of, it's actually most of the city councils this would apply to. It may be a matter of not only making an order to change the name of the local government district, we may also have to make an order to change the name of the council. So it may mean that we make two pieces of legislation. In the case of just a council that isn't a city council, in most cases that will simply be a matter of us making an order to change the name of the local government district. But anyway, in either case, the council has to write to the department, and we will make the necessary legislation to change the name.
Yes, because they need to print the stationaries and all that, signs, or the council and all that too.
Also, would impact, particularly if you take purely on the borough, district, city, presumably it would impact on the email addresses, because whatever level.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Have they all decided where their headquarters are all going to be?
I think some of them have, and some have decided, actually, in terms of council meetings, that they're not going to have one centre, but they're going to rotate.
Right.
But those are operational decisions for councils
For them,
to
yeah.
make.
Sure. Okay. A lot more?
Yes, Chair. Interested in this discussion around borough status and charter marking. For instance, take Medulster Council. Dungannon has borough status. Cookstown and Magherafelt doesn't. What happens to Dungannon's borough status? Can it be, for instance, retained, and if the council so decided, for the new council just carry on with borough status?
They can actually apply the charter of that council to the whole of the borough, if that council wants to be a borough.
What's the position then in relation to other things that have been given by charter? For instance, not least marketing rights that have been conferred upon towns. Is there any change there? Because let's take, for instance, some towns have designated through charter where you can sell, for instance, fish in a certain street, but you can't sell pigs in that street.
Right.
You can sell, and you must sell flowers and nursery items, for instance.
Yes.
Dungannon Market Square is a good example, but I don't think that the charter would allow you to sell it in Thomas Street, because despite the fact it's just a street beside it. But that, because I remember an experience many years ago where the council used to collect toll, market and toll, for the sale of every pig and every sheep and every other animal that was sold either through the livestock sales yards, and the council would come along on a monthly basis and they would collect all that market and toll. And I remember that being tested one time in the High Court.
Okay.
Does that all change now, or is that all still in place, in existence, that if I want to sell, for instance, fish, I think Ann Street in Dungannon is designated, you'll sell fish
You're
there.
free, man, you can walk the fish down the road.
But you'll sell you'll not be selling it in the market.
That's linked to the borough charter, is it?
Well,
Is there
I think it goes
specifically
back-
about
no, I
borough
think it goes
charter?
back to Royal Charter, back to the 1700s. And I don't want to start there,
Yes.
because that would take too long to bring up to where we are today.
We'll have to start cutting them up there.
Yes.
No, these regulations are only in relation to the borough charters.
And nothing, well, I'm glad to hear you say that, but then nothing else changes. That all stays in place.
Yeah, I mean,
But nobody
It all
enforces
depends.
it, I'm
Was the
sure.
shambles market?
Do they?
Sure, you
They
Chair,
do?
they are
It was a
enforced.
shambles market.
You
You
should.
got
BU certain they're enforced.
Right, okay.
BU
Isn't that
certain.
right?
Goodness me.
Yeah, well, all you need is someone who decides to sell some product at some position where the charter doesn't grant it, and then they say, right, okay, you're out of order.
Someone's market forgot.
Ah,
I mean, I
although
don't-
that charter was, what, 500 years old? Yeah.
I'm not sure what regulation or legislation that falls under, but all I can say is it's not this. You know, I think
You say that was
You're glad?
Very relieved.
I'm glad it is.
no, if the council in question has an issue, I think they maybe need to look at where they're getting the powers to do that and ask the relevant department to make sure that it's provided for. I mean, we are doing a set of consequential amendments for departments that have named councils or council areas, and would need to change that because of the new boundaries and the new geographies in local government. But I don't think we've been told of anything to do with where you can and cannot
Where you can sell fish. Or...
No, if it was a shambles market, now you could gut them out wherever you wanted, you know. So,
Are you hoping you're not going to be told to? Is that?
I'm hoping not.
Yes.
I like the idea of
And I don't know, I mean, I know DSD has responsibility for street trading legislation, so I don't know if that's where it might fall under, but...
This is slightly different.
Yeah.
This comes down by charter.
Yeah.
easy.
You're assuring me that that won't be affected. That's what you're saying.
Well, no, we're saying that this doesn't impact on it. Whether or not it's impacted by decisions that councils take is for councils to determine.
Up to them. Yeah, yeah.
I've heard what Linda has said. Joe.
Well, no more questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, members, are you content
Thank you very
for
much.
the department to proceed with laying the route? Content?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it doesn't interfere with fish. And I think it's a Friday too. You can only sell it at night.
Okay, members, we are now on to a few SROs. First one is on page 165, 2015-39, the Planning General Regulations NI. The purpose of the route is to provide that an application for planning permission by a council itself or by a council jointly with another person shall be determined by that council unless the application is called in by the department. The committee considered the SL1 for this route at our meeting on the 11th of December 2014, and we were content for the department to make the route. The route is subject to the negative resolution procedure and will come into operation on 1st of April 2015. The examiner has drawn the committee's attention to drafting defects in the statutory route, and the department has agreed to bring forward amending regulations to correct this at the earliest opportunity. And it's on page 56 of your tabled items, members. So if I just put the following question to you. The Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2015/39, the Planning General Regulations NI 2015, and on the basis that the Department of the Environment has agreed to bring forward amending regulations to correct errors identified by the examiner of statutory rules at the earliest opportunity, has no objection to the rule. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Next item on page 177 is an SR Planning Use Classes Order. The purpose of the route is to consolidate the current Planning Use Classes Order to make it compliant with the 2011 Act, when the majority of planning decisions are transferred to District Council in April 2015. We looked at the SL1 on the 11th of December, and we were content for the department to make the route. The route is subject to the negative resolution procedure and will come into operation on 1st of April 2015. The examiner of statutory route is content with the technical aspects of the route. And I will put the following question to members. The Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2015/40, the Planning Use Classes Order NI 2015, and has no objection to the committee to the route.
Great.
Thank you. Next one, another SR on page 192, the planning claims for compensation regulation. The purpose of the route is to transfer to the new council the same range of provision relating to claims for compensation that are currently available to the department. We consider the SL1 at our meeting on the 11th of January 2015, and we were content for the department to make the route. The route is subject to the negative resolution procedure and will come into operation on 1st of April 2015. The examiner of statutory rules is content with the technical aspects of the route. If members are content, I will put the following question to you. The Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2015/58, the Planning Claims for Compensation Regulations, NI 2015, and has no objection to the route. Are members agree?
Yes.
Thank you. Next, on page 205, planning hazardous substance. Purpose of the route is to specify hazardous substances under the 2011 Planning Act, as well as the procedures for administering these. We consider the route, the SL1 at our meeting on 15 January 2015, and we're content for the department to make the route. The route is subject to the negative resolution procedure and will come into operation on 1st of April 2015. The examiner of statutory rules is content with the technical aspects of the route. If members are content, I'll put the following question to you. The Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2015/61, the Planning Hazardous Substances Regulations NI 2015, and has no objection to the route. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Next SR is on page 252, Planning Local Development Plan Regulations. The purpose of the route is to make provision for the detailed preparation requirements of local development plans, such as making timetable for the preparation of the plan, agreeing it, and making it available to the public. The committee considered the SL1 for this route at our meeting on 20th November 2014, and we're content for the department to make the route. The route is subject to the negative resolution procedure and will come into operation on 1st of April 2015. The examiner has not yet commented on the route. So I put the following question to members. The Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2015/62, the Planning Local Development Plan Regulations NI 2015, and subject to the report of the examiner of statutory rules, has no objection to the route. Are members agree?
Great.
Thank you. Next SR on page 278. And that's the Planning Statement of Community Involvement Regulation NI. The purpose of the route is to prescribe the form and content of a council statement of community involvement. The regulations also contain provision for the discretionary public consultation on the statement and the procedures for its agreement with the department prior to making it available for public inspection. The committee considered the SL1 at our meeting on 20th November 2014 and were content for the department to make the route. The route is subject to the negative resolution procedure and will come into operation on 1st of April 2015. The examiner has not yet commented on the route. If members are content, I will put the following question to you. The Committee for the Environment has considered the SR 2015/63, the Planning Statement of Community Involvement Regulations NI 2015, and subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the route. Are members agreed?
Great.
Thank you. Next one, item 16, correspondence. Members, there's a list on page 290. Just want to bring one issue to you, and that's under 16.1. The DOE retention and disposal schedule for employees' records. That's at page 291, and also tabled paper page 62. Okay, I refer members to the disposal and retention schedule for the employees' records of the Department of the Environment. The schedule is required to be laid before the Northern Ireland Assembly under Section 8(2) of the Public Records Act, Northern Ireland 1923, and in accordance with the rules of the Disposal of Documents Order 1925 by the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland. The schedule is subject to negative resolution procedure. Are members content with the schedule? Content?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Members, have you any comment on any other item under correspondence, or are you content with the suggested actions on the cover note on page 290? Content?
Content?
Yes.
Okay. Work forward programme, members, is on page 308. Just to remind you, we'll be in Bangor next week. Next week the committee will attend the Marine Conservation Zone workshop in the Marine Court Hotel in Bangor, and we'll also hold a formal meeting at the event. This will necessitate a slightly earlier start. I'm sorry, members, at 9:45. We're going to start at 9:45. Okay.
Next week.
And are members content with that? Peter very quickly said yes.
What time is it saying there from Armagh for that? 6:30, is it?
Yes. I'm sorry, but it's only, well, it's another 15 minutes to get. It's another half an hour earlier for you. Start. Okay.
Okay.
But yeah,
I would point
9:45.
out, Chair, it's generally speaking, as far for a lot of us to come from Bangor to another venue as it is for people to come from another venue to Bangor.
But he's coming from Armagh, though. There's a long.
What's that?
Any miles off from Donaghadee? Right.
I have a lot shorter journey.
Second time we've been to
Okay,
Bangor.
AOB, no AOBs, members? No, okay, so the next meeting then, members? Then yes, the committee should meet next time, the following week, then, sorry.
That's fine.
Sorry, I'm confusing you. Next week, it's going to be in the Hamilton Suite. I'm trying to read it as I speak. Yes. Hamilton Suite.
Thank you.
Thank you.